station. Any unattended articles are likely to be removed without warning.
This is the Hour of History Cities podcast with your host, Stephen Bauman. The Hour of History Cities podcast, as well as other Hour of History podcasts, can be streamed and downloaded at hourofhistory.com, iTunes, Google Music, our YouTube channel, and TuneIn. Be sure to also check out our Hour of History blog at hourofhistory.com/blog. And now we begin the Hour of History Cities podcast with your host, Stephen Bauman.
Hello and welcome to Hour of History Cities podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Bauman, and we're back with a new city. After our successful series on the cities of the Russia World Cup, after a long, deep look at the city of Havana that I hope you all enjoyed, I had to choose another city and move on with a sort of different direction, something that has been a much bigger challenge and hopefully is also important and interesting to you. This new series is going to be a 5-part 10-item series that looks at the city of Kolkata. Now, this city has a long, important history both in Asia and in the West, and it's a city that has multiple names, it has multiple histories, it has comments made by famous poets, it has famous poets and writers from the East, famous poets and writers from the West that have been there, and there's always descriptions you see of this city that are putting it in a place, and I'm going to try to find if those are correct. People who have gone to this city and who have described what it is have usually come out with a representation, often a character that is something that is open to a lot of debate. And hopefully I can answer some of that debate by looking into its rich history. So let's get started. Now, the city is called Kolkata. It has been called Kolkata since 2001 when the government of West Bengal, the government of the city, decided to rename it based on the Bangla pronunciation of the word. The previous few centuries, the city was called Calcutta, and it continues to be called Calcutta in the Western world, despite the very minuscule amount of difference in the actual pronunciation. For ease of listening and ease of pronunciation, myself not being a Bangla speaker, and I'm going to do my best throughout this city's podcast, I'm going to say Calcutta throughout the show. Now, with that out of the way, Calcutta is one of the most important cities in India, even still today. It's the capital of the Indian state of West Bengal. Bangladesh is its own independent country, and hopefully in this series we'll get into a little bit why Bangladesh and West Bengal are part of different countries. But before we get that far, we need to mention that Calcutta is still enormously significant on the world scale. It has over 14 million people in the region of Calcutta. In the city proper, it has over 4 million people, and it has an enormous cultural significance in terms of writers and historical actors, especially during the period of British rule. Yet, when I decided to start this series on this new city, I couldn't start with the British. Just like when I was talking about Havana, it felt wrong to just start with the Spanish. I wanted to look beyond what was before the British, yet it was extremely difficult with Calcutta, because Calcutta was just one of 3 small and rather insignificant fishing villages of the Mughal dynasty. So even though this city, or historians have traced the history of this city for nearly 2 millennia, people have lived here for 2,000 years, yet the real written, recorded history of the city of Calcutta begins in the late 17th century, in the 1690s, when it's actually bought or leased really by the East India Company. Still, I don't want to ignore those thousands of years of history simply because they don't have a written record. In fact, it's important, especially when talking about any city, especially without the written record, that we at least come to terms with the people who lived there, people, generations and generations who lived there without sort of leaving a written Western record. It's still important history. So my first two items are significant not only for this period that comes before the British, but they continue to be significant throughout the entire history of this city of Calcutta. So the first thing I want to choose is fish. The Ilish is an important fish. It's the official fish of Bangladesh. It is important in Bengali cuisine, and it is a fish that is found in the Hooghly River, which is where Calcutta is located. So Calcutta, this massive city now, was once a tiny village in the Mughal dynasty that was located on a river. It was likely that generations and generations of people would fish in this river, fish being one of the predominant sources of nutrition and food for this culture, and it has continued this way for millennia. So fish is the first item, and this continues to be important not only through this era of simplicity and this era of not having millions of people as being an important food source, but it also remains important as we go later into the colonial period and towards things like the Bengal famine in the 20th century and the famines that happened even earlier, when this land that was plentiful for thousands of years ends up not being able to provide for one reason or another to the millions of people that live there. And a lot of people lose their life because of it. So the fish is both a source of abundance and a source of history for the people of Calcutta. And the second thing that I'm choosing for this week is the goddess Kali. So religion is always going to be an important theme in the city of Calcutta's history. When people mention Calcutta, immediately a lot of people start to think of Mother Teresa, who's going to come into this later, especially Westerners. But Kali, the goddess of the Hindu religion, is important to this city, and it's one of the potential explanations for why it's called Kolkata, because there is a famous Kali god, a famous temple dedicated to Kali that has been significant and was significant through much of the Mughal dynasty, where Hindus would come and pay homage to this goddess before making a journey. So that still exists there. It's a landing stage on the banks of the Hooghly River, the Hooghly River being a link to the Ganges River and one of the most important rivers in all of India. This location next to the river is also important and significant in the history of Calcutta, not only because of its ability to sort of provide a place for worship with this goddess, but also provide food in the fish. It also provides transportation, and that becomes central when this fishing village that has enjoyed thousands and thousands of years of rather uninterrupted life and systematic generation after generation is met by some traders. So Portuguese traders are in India as early as the 1500s and in Bengal as well. So the Portuguese had been in Bengal. They had established trading posts in Bengal as early as the 16th century. But it's not until the 1690s that the British actually buy 3 fishing villages from the Mughal Empire. So that's sort of where we're going to leave this traditionalist fishing village society and move on into the more modern history of Calcutta. So just the preview, the goddess Kali and the fish, that's sort of like the baseline understanding these fishing villages of this original Kolkata. We don't necessarily know exactly what it means. There were a couple other villages, but what happens is Calcutta becomes the most significant city in the British Raj. In 1690, the East India Company, led by the English, arrives in Bengal and is trying to sort of consolidate its business model. It sends people out, administrators, to go and find potential places in which they can set up bases and start this sort of production, start these tradings with India. So Calcutta was a fishing village, and it was bought for only a couple hundred rupees that would be repaid every year to the Mughal Empire, and it was sort of a tax right to use the land that was transferred to the East India Company. So Job Charnock becomes the official founder of Calcutta. Now, this is disputed later on in its history when the government says that Calcutta has no actual founder, because there were actually thousands of years of history before the colonial era. So it's important to think about when we look at any cities, especially a city like Calcutta that's located on a river, that's located in an area where humanity could succeed and humanity could flourish before we entered these sort of Western models of trade and commerce and politics and things like that. So we consider that as sort of the beginning. And when I have to break a city up into 5 simple stages or 10 simple items, I think it's fair and necessary to give the first 2 items at least to those 2,000 years. Now, I'm not an archaeologist or an anthropologist, so I can't go back and sort of make the whole show about those 2,000 years, but it is something we should think about, and we should give time to the thought and the generations and generations of people who had lived in these villages long before the British ever came. Now, once the East India Company is there and the city of Calcutta becomes more and more fortified, it becomes more and more central location in trade, its history is irrevocably changed, and the fate of the people who lived in this fishing village is also changed as more and more people from all over Bengal and all over the world come to make Calcutta one of the greatest cities in the world. So thanks for joining the Cities podcast on Hour of History. Remember, on Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place.